Let me see if I can say this succinctly. I am convinced that the call to preach is something that God has to extend. It's not something that the church creates per se. And I recognize that, everybody doesn't have to agree with me, but that's my conviction. The church did not call me. My grandmother did not anoint me. God called me. And I've shared with our church that whoever calls you has to keep you. And so I would not just run into it because somebody thinks you make a great preacher. My earliest memory is of the Spirit of God impressing upon my conscience and my sense of person that I was born to preach. I was the kid while many of us were laughing and playing in the back of the church, sitting on the edge of his seat saying that right there is what I'm supposed to do. Now, I wanted to have a shutdown too, like the preacher had at the church, the art of celebration, the art of intonation. I don't have that, right. But I can say that when it went there, I was like, yes, God, that's what I'm supposed to do. So I would, those were the broadcast services really where that would happen. But the morning services, I'd be down in the children's church serving and learning and that kind of thing. But as soon as church was over, man, I'd break up those back steps and I'd run through the choir stand and over to the pastor and pull this coattail. And I'm probably 7 or 8 at this point, and I meant it. Man, you gotta let me preach. When are you gonna introduce me to the church? That's what I would say. Regularly, I'd like hold out my hand. When are you gonna introduce me to the church? And he was so patient. He didn't just brush me off, but he just said, next week, I think. And next week turned into next year, and so forth and so on. But one time, we used to have these tent revivals, and it was a white tent, and we were at 111th and Racine, and some of everybody was coming. And Timothy Fleming may have been in town this particular night, and Pastor Parson let me sit with the preachers, and I just, even as a boy, and I was certainly a child, but I felt like that's where I belonged. I had a moment at the end of undergrad where I was going to do a different graduate program. I wanted to make money. I had seen what could happen to a pastor up close. It wasn't pretty. And I was like, Lord, this is it. I got admitted to a program, full ride with some other stuff. And I said, I will be the best help a preacher has ever had. Pastor, I'll give, I'll chair committees, I'll preach, all that kind of stuff. Just let me go. And the Lord would not let me go. I don't think I slept good for 3 weeks during that season, just having to respond to which way I would go. And I got admitted to Yale and a graduate program at Illinois, that kind of thing. And providentially, the Lord opened a door for me to go to Trinity. I didn't even know it existed. True story. I didn't even know it existed. It was not the kind of school I would pick for myself. But I can sense now with the trajectory of my life that God had been orchestrating things to get me in the place where I am now. And it is a call. And I appreciate you for framing it that way. It's not a vocation that I just said, oh, it's something I want to do. I'm constrained to do this. I can do nothing else.
That is not my testimony. No.
Tell us your story.
I genuinely feel like while my call came from God and was negotiated before the foundations of the earth, God also created me to be, someone that has to be coerced into certain things. And so me answering or even acknowledging the call was, it was a process of elimination. I grew up in a home where my father was a lifelong Catholic and my mother was a lifelong missionary Baptist. And
I love those kind of Baptists, That's real Baptist.
It's so Baptist. I mean, it is so Baptist to the place and to the point to where my grandfather, my mother's dad, was her pastor, lifelong pastor. And I just remember a whole lot of those Sundays, overtly and covertly, getting this message that as a woman, ministry would never be an option for me. you know, in the Catholic Church, you have to go through a certain, you know, order of sacraments leading up to confirmation, which is when you are confirmed Catholic. And part of that process is a rigorous set of courses called Christian or Catholic Christian Discipleship, CCD. CCD is all about Catholic theology and Catholic polity and Catholic hierarchy from the Vatican down. And it was very clear, there's no place for me here as a leader. And then in the Baptist church and the missionary Baptist church, there were just a number of experiences and tropes that kind of got recycled over and over again in the space to where it was very clear there as well. I had a pivot in the narrative when I was about 12 or 13, and my mother left the missionary Baptist church to go join a new church, and that was New Creation Christian Fellowship at 12525 Nacogdoches, San Antonio, Texas. And New Creation is where I became a follower of Christ. It's where I began to seek Jesus Christ for myself. And it was also the place where, for the first time in my life, I witnessed a woman in ministry. And this was not just any woman in ministry, okay? This was an extraordinary, anointed, fierce, unapologetic Black woman who walked in her authority, making no apologies for any of it, right? And that was the Reverend Dr. Claudette Anderson Copeland. And I think that I'm one of many women, millennial and otherwise, who was awakened to a call the moment we saw a model of another woman doing ministry. I think that was unique because maybe I never thought about ministry because I never saw another woman doing it, you know, until Pastor C. And I just remember feeling mesmerized by this woman, you know, her preaching prowess, her intellectual just brilliance, and you know, her shamelessness about her story and how she interwove it into her ministry, her fierce vestments that matched her heels and her lipstick, and her hair was always laid. I mean, there was just this kind of unmitigated womanist, just everything that I never thought was possible. And I just remember thinking, why did it take me so long to see this and to experience this? So my call came in that church. My youth pastor, Elder Curtis Campbell, in that church was a prophet. He had a visionary skill. And it was at these like youth nights, right? Where, you know, you're really experiencing the power and the presence of the Spirit. And he came up behind me on the altar and he was like, the Lord has shown me you preaching the gospel to the nations. And I was like, okay. You know, just wasn't really trying to hear that. I was 16. You know, who's trying to hear God's calling? Well, you were at 7 or 8. I was over here like, give me the keys to the car. Right. He's like, give me the keys to the church. Right. I was not trying to hear all this. So fast forward some years later, I was at Clark Atlanta University. And at the time at CAU, you had to take one class in religious studies to graduate. Wow. And it was about that time where I needed to just get that credit out the way. And so I registered for this course called Psychology of Religion with Dr. Philip Dunstan. And the course was absolutely magnificent. You know, having grown up in the church, I knew what it looked like to see Black people practicing various forms of Christianity. But that course was an intellectual entree into how and why we've had to be religious to survive within this context of utter white supremacy. And I was fascinated. And so the next semester, I took another course in religion. I exceeded the requirement. When I cross-registered at Spelman, which is where I work now, for a class on Black theology with Dr. Cecil Cone, who is with the Ancestors now. And in the course, he had us write a midterm paper. And after I turned in my paper, he requested a meeting with me. And I just was sure that he was about to rip my paper to shreds. I just knew he was so smart. I mean, the way Dr. Clone just talked about stuff, it was intimidating. So I avoided going to his office, right? So for about 3 weeks, I avoided, and then he was like, let's schedule right now a time for you to come. You know, you've been avoiding me. So I get to his office, you know, at this set time and date, and he says, well, why did you avoid me? Why did you, like, I just knew you were going to tear my paper up. Well, why did you think that? Do you not believe that you deserve to be here? Mm-hmm. And so we kind of talked through some of that and what I can now call a little case of imposter syndrome and, you know, different things that were going on. But then he clarified, he said, I called you to my office because you're called. Mm. He was like, the Black church needs your voice and you should go to seminary. Mm. And I said, okay. And it was, again, a process of elimination because I had shown up to Clark Atlanta to be the next Oprah Winfrey, mass communications. But, you know, I found myself in some ways coming alive with this kind of intellectual exploration of Black religion. And I also felt the beautiful correlation between how intellectually stimulated I was and how I began to walk closer with God. And I think that was it. That was it. And I said, great, next semester I declared the double major, started looking into seminaries, and here we are.
Well, I was fascinated with church and everything about it growing up. And so, you know, I was just a church kid. And I remember I was under 10 for sure, and I got some type of award, and I went up to accept my award, and I remember telling them, you know, every Sunday night when we get home, you know, I take my bath and I get in the bed and I watch Archie Bunker and I hear my mother say, get her down from there, you know. And then I continue to say, you know, and I just want to wipe that sweat and drink that juice. And that's what I saw my pastor do, right? It just had nothing to do with anything, but I'm like, you know, that's next, you know. Now I got this award, I want to wipe sweat and drink. But I really didn't want to, right? I would stand in the pews, you know, and stand behind Kay, who was a phenomenal director, and I would direct the choir. I was just a church kid. I loved everything about it. Whatever it is, let me try it. And we went to this church. I can't remember. I think she was my cousin's aunt, and she was pastoring. Her name was Pauline. And she preached a sermon I'll never forget. Well, okay, maybe I forgot the sermon, but I never forget the title. And it was, Your Bad Ain't Bad, right? And she wasn't Dr. Copeland. She was not as poised. She was actually sweating and drinking juice. You know, like she was actually more masculine now that I can understand it, right? Because that's probably what she had seen. But she was some kind of preacher. And I just never forgot her, but I didn't think I was called at all. And I remember being home. I was a weird kid, so I told my mom one day, I think it might have been the day of the Oklahoma City bombing, I could say to my mom, Mom, I don't want to go to school today. And she would say, okay, why not? Sometimes I would have a weird feeling that I didn't feel comfortable. And she would say, okay, or I would say, I need to go to work with you today. I want to be close to you. She would say, okay. This day I said, I need to spend some time with God. It's been a while. And she said, okay. And so I remember reading scripture, and I felt like this day was like no other day, that I could see things differently when I read, that I could hear from God very clearly. And so I was napping in and out, and I saw a vision. I was preaching to the nations. It was very clear. But I wasn't going to tell my mother because she tells everything. And I finally told her, and I said, Mom, don't tell nobody, you know, but I'm called, you know. And she was like, okay, I'm not going to tell nobody. I was like, okay. I got back to her job, and this Pentecostal lady was like, oh, God, I've been knowing that you've been, you know. I was like, oh, man, you know. She told, right? And then my aunt calls, like, Brianna. I was like, oh, gosh, like, Mom, you promised me you weren't going to tell anybody. And I didn't really want to do anything with it. I go to Arizona State because my aunt is sick. She raised my mom, she's sick, she's going to the Mayo Clinic, so I'm gonna go to Arizona State to be near Scottsdale and be with her. She is a Grenada-born woman, and she said, I'm not going to no Scottsdale for treatment. So I went. When I got there, that's when I really realized I had to do something, I guess, with the calling. I went to church, and I did see women there, right? And so I said, okay, one day I go down and I say, I'm called to preach or whatever this means. Someone says, when you gonna do missions? I said, I'm not doing no missions. What they got to do with anything? Somebody else said, well, you gonna be an evangelist? I said, I don't think so. I didn't know enough, but I knew I wasn't an evangelist, right? So I accept my calling, and I'm licensed there. And I'm kind of the girl wonder. I'm graduating from Arizona State at 19 and 2 years with a degree in political science. I want to go to law school. My dad's very proud of me because he knows I'm going to hit the Supreme Court, and he wants me to be that. And he would send me like third grade Marshall pens, and he would have me take golf, and he would make us taste caviar because I was going to be this brilliant lawyer and then judge and Supreme Court justice, right? So I remember calling my dad. He didn't believe in women in ministry. And he felt like he wasted his money trying to make me a lawyer. So he's very disappointed with my decision. But I'm like, don't trip, I'm not going to, I'm still going to be a lawyer. And then I remember the day I had been interviewed by, I was about to be interviewed by the newspaper and the news for graduating so early. And I was a girl wonder in the church. It doesn't take much to be a golden child in the black church, right? And so I was that person. And I remember that day I heard God so clearly say that I couldn't go to law school, that I needed to actively follow my calling. And I cried, because I wanted to be wealthy. I liked Louis and Chanel and stuff. And I didn't see how to do that as a preacher. And I remember calling my mother, and I was screaming, and she said, Brianna, you're gonna do it the easy way or the hard way. But it's gonna come. And I told her, what my dad said, and I won't tell you how she responded, but my mother was just like, you're going to surrender today or you're going to surrender later. Yeah. But you're going to surrender because I know you. And so I went and talked to my pastor. He said, okay, the next step is seminary. I was not like Neichelle and Willie, right? I didn't have I didn't have access to this religious scholarship in undergrad. So I didn't know seminary was next or anything. I go into the scholarship box. I find some scholarship work from Fuller. I fill out the scholarship paperwork and send it in, and when they got the scholarship paperwork, they saw me in the newspaper and on the news, and so they called me and said, so just go ahead and apply. This is what we're gonna do for you, right? And that is really how I began my journey. I get to Fuller, and I meet Dr. William H. Myers, who is my mentor, and I just love him. And he used to call me Young Timothy, and because I got there like 1920. And he told me I was going to be more than just a preacher every now and then, that I was a scholar, that I had a calling to pastor, whatever way that would look. And he just made me really take seriously my call and commit to it. Because I was still thinking of all the stuff I was going to do, like, okay, I got to hurry up and finish this seminary so I can head to law school, or so I can be wealthy, But he settled me. It made me see that there was so much greater and so much more to my ministry than I wanted to see, because I had bright lights and Gucci and stuff before me,
I accepted my call to preach at the First Union Baptist Church, 1027 Avenue K, Galveston, Texas, 77550.
Nice.
And I accepted my call to preach at 16. And I know that I was called earlier than 16, for many reasons, but some of my earliest memories in life are actually connected to me playing church, and I was always the pastor. Play church with my sister at home, play church with my friends in the backyard. Playing church was something that I did. In fact, my first sermon, I'm told, my first sermon was when I was 5, from the text Psalms 23. So my first sermon was actually from Psalms 23.
That's some city in California.
Yes.
So I I didn't feel free to say to anyone that I was called to preach. I had no models of what it would be for a child, for a young person to do pretty much anything in the church. I grew up in a pretty conservative Black Baptist church in Galveston, Texas, and there just weren't a lot of opportunities for service, let alone leadership for children. You know, we were the subject of ministry. We didn't get to be actors of ministry, and so I didn't feel free to say to anyone that was something that I felt God calling me to do. It wasn't until I was 16 and I was at some kind of youth explosion, and there was just an awesome sort of sensing of how Spirit was moving in the place. You know, hundreds of youth crying, shouting, speaking in tongues, all kinds of things, and which was unusual to me. Speaking in tongues was unusual because I was staunch Baptist from Texas, and we don't do that at my home church, at the First Union Baptist Church. But it was an experience there that I heard God tell me to go apologize to one of my classmates. I had said something to her, or maybe something about her, I can't remember the details, and so I went to apologize to her, and asked for forgiveness, apologized, asked for forgiveness. She forgave me. And then I heard God clearly say that this is the work you're supposed to do. Extend and ask for forgiveness. And that is when I heard God tell me that I was going to preach. Really, I heard God tell me I was going to pastor. I was going to have this ministry of reconciliation. I don't know if I'm there yet. I don't know if that really characterizes my ministry to date, but that is what I heard at 16. So I accepted the call. Then I told my pastor. 4 months later, he let me preach he let me preach. 4 months later, I was 17. I just turned 17. The Sunday after my birthday, my 17th birthday, is when I preached my first sermon. And I experienced some, I experienced some spiritual violence, spiritual abuse from leadership at the church, particularly my childhood pastor. And because of that type of abuse, I actually in college, my freshman year at Morehouse, actually decided I was not going to preach anymore. And it was then that, I'd just given up on that. I said, you know what, I'm going to go be an OBGYN. I'm going to Yale Medical School, and I'm going to go make some money. That's what I decided I was going to do, because I'd really been turned off by the models of leadership. I had seen pastoral leadership. I had seen, and really, really deeply affected by that experience that I had, those experiences that I had with my pastor. But in college, I experienced a recall, if that is a thing, and I had to, and that recall was really more communal. It was a type of communal discernment where, Dean Lawrence Edward Carter said to me very clearly that the world needs to hear the word that God has given you. And hearing that, I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm not doing this type of work. But I was at Sister's Chapel, listening to a person who I was not free to say I believe could be a preacher. I'm staunch Baptist from Galveston, Texas. I was listening to Bishop Vashti McKenzie, and what she preached that night did two things for me. One, it freed me to declare that I believe women are called to ministry at Sister's Chapel, listening to Vashti McKenzie, and it reclaimed me for the ministry. So I've been doing it since.